us a countdown before we start? All right, okay.
Right.
We're live.
Hi, we're live now. I'm John from Broadsheet, and you're very welcome to the 17th in a series of shows we're doing on the Mother and Baby Home Report. We're joined by Breda Murphy, Tune campaigner, Ewan Duffy, adoptee activist and advocate, and Frank Browney, a lawyer whose father was a Tune adoptee. Good evening, everyone, and welcome.
Evening, John.
I'm very sorry for missing last week. Quite a lot has happened since. And Breda, I just want to go straight to you about the Drew Harris came out publicly and suggested or invited anybody who wanted to report a crime, I guess, regarding the mother and baby homes to come forward.
Yeah, it's on the back of the Mother and Baby Home Report, I suppose, and the fact that it does not deliver justice in any way, shape or form. Now, one would have thought that the commissioner would have received the entire file from the minister, but that doesn't appear to be the case. So they're looking for survivors and those affected to tell their stories of abuse within mother and baby homes. And they're looking particularly at the fact that over 5,600 young girls who were aged between 12 and 18 gave birth in those institutions, and how they became pregnant and what justice was delivered at that time, which of course, you know, there's no semblance ever of justice. That appears to be it. That appears to be the crimes that they're looking at are the crimes within the institutions, which are of rape, incest, that, you know, the girls became pregnant by. But there are many, many crimes. And of course, if the administrative records from both the state and various government departments and the entire file that's held today by the minister, and if they did like CAB do and go and seize the documents in all of the archives of religious of state, then surely they could begin a proper investigation. Because by asking members like ours, you know, going back 70 odd years to have the documentation when in fact they're not even entitled to their own birth cert, like it's laughable, except that it's true. You know, I think that there is something seriously wrong with the state that now nods to the commissioner to say, you know, we're drawing a line in the sand. We've got this definitive, as Micheál Martin said, definitive report, which seems to, you know, it gives a government narrative. There's absolutely no doubt about that, and it prolongs the suffering. But there doesn't appear to be political will to get to the truth. So it's all smoke and mirrors, and you know, nothing is sincere. I mean, I think there was always a predetermined outcome, and we saw this with the fact that the report, the commissioners worked for almost 6 years, 1 month of 6 years, you know, almost double the time frame. They were to have it delivered in 3 years. 7 judicial reviews now pending. 33 Garda reports made as of 2 days ago. But I think the expectation to go to people who have been abused by the system, to ask them to put faith in the system, when they, in fact, Gardaí themselves were responsible for returning women. It's very, very difficult to see how this can deliver. And of course, it won't deliver, because the DPP will say there isn't enough evidence here.
No.
So, like, already it's a failed effort.
As a lawyer, Frank?
Well, I do actually understand the comments that Breda has just made. But what I would say, I'm not entirely on the same page as Breda, because yes, she's right to say the way that it looks and the way it's been presented to Irish people and to the survivors, it is a done deal. This well, you know, we're just effectively ticking a box. But I come back to what I said in previous issues. So like the archiving issue and so on and so forth. And I said, way back then, that's not the end of the story. What we're going to see is a lot of challenges and a lot of actions. And I think we're going to see exactly the same thing arise here. Because let's start from the basic point. The basic point is the Garda Commissioner has made a public statement, and he's inviting one and all to make criminal complaints. But within the statements, if you actually look at the statements, it actually illustrates that the Gardaí, based on the Mother and Baby Home report, recognise that criminal offences have been committed. So that's their first point that we should all bear in mind. They know that criminal offences have been committed, or suspect criminal offences have been committed. The second thing about their statements, and let's remember the Garda Commissioner has made this public statement, and he will have made it with the approval of the government, the Irish government. There will be discussions on that. But what I found interesting about the statement was two things. The focus is on mother and baby homes, and quite correctly so. But when you read the statements, there are two conditions that create the rise of criminal complaints. And the first is, when you look at the statements, they are talking about, they want people to report a crime that arose out of time they had spent within a mother and baby home. And I would suggest that encapsulates all onward experiences. So adoptees, Magdalene laundries, industrial schools, you name it. The second part of their statement talks about a crime committed at or within a mother and baby home. So you can see the distinction. A crime that arises out of time spent there, okay, so that imports the onward point, and a crime that's committed within. Now, to take up Breda's point, because Breda's point is really, really valid, and it's this, because and I know from experience, if you are going to investigate a crime, you gather your documentation before you start, before you actually talk to anybody. Okay, so you're coming to the point, and I saw this in the statements of the Garda Commissioner. Basically, we can't get to the documentation. Garda Commissioner, because that's not correct. Because if you believe that a crime has been committed, you therefore have to respect the rights of those who have had crimes committed against them, because they have Article 6 rights under the European Convention of Human Rights. And there are plenty of cases out there about deficient police investigations which prevented victims from achieving a fair hearing under Article 6. But it goes further, because those records will be held by a number of people. So, for example, the Hyde Park Laundry records are held by the Department of the Taoiseach. Tuzla has records from the Bon Secours. The religious orders have their own records. They're all over the place. Yeah. But under Section 6 of the Criminal Justice Miscellaneous Provisions Act 1997, it provides extensive powers to the Garda Síochána, where a sergeant and above can go before a circuit judge and apply for a warrant to enter, search, and seize items that will support an allegation against a person whereby an arrestable offence is being committed. You don't need, Breda is correct, you don't actually need, in the first instance, if you suspect crimes have been committed in particular institutions and you know the locations of the documents and those documents are not forthcoming, the Garda Síochána can go to the court. I dare say, John, there will be screaming lawyers out there listening to this who will say that's not possible. That fellow there doesn't know what he's talking about. Well, you know what? Let's have a discussion about the powers that exist that can support the actions of the Garda Síochána.
Can you put forward an example of what you mean? Say if a woman came to you and she had a child in Hume, for instance, and she's come to you now and said, I want to go to the police. What would you, what would be the process then for her then?
Yeah, I mean, the situation, I suspect what's going on here, it's very odd policing to request that the victims come first. If they've already stated that they suspect that the crime has taken place, they should be accessing the records. But okay, this is the way that they have decided to play it. I can absolutely assure you in other jurisdictions, that's not the way it's done. Okay, but okay, let's take it in the scenario that you're talking about. Let's assume that a woman has come to me and she says, I was incarcerated in the Tuam mother and baby home. My child was taken away from me. I suspect the child was died after I was taken away from the home. I was put into a Magdalene laundry. So you can see all the issues of suspicious death. You can see false imprisonment, imprisonment without a trial or judicial order. There may be those who will rely on the 1923 Local Government Miscellaneous Provisions Act to support that. But that act, in my view, does not override the constitutional provisions of individuals in the 1922 and 1937 Constitution of the Free State and ultimately the Republic of Ireland. So therefore, there you have the woman in question has presented the facts. Constitutional rights are engaged to begin with. The question of whether or not subsequent acts at the door, like the 1923 Act, override the Constitution, I think is more than a moot point. I think it is something that the Gardaí and the DPP would have to look at, and it is challengeable, I suspect. But then, despite all of that, despite those initial things, the woman is going to set out the circumstances, the facts, and thereby, John, there's another issue here about the methodology of interview, and I really am concerned about that, and we can talk about that perhaps another time. But what you have got here is a set of allegations, and if the Gardaí turn around and say, well, do you have any documentary proof? And the woman will obviously say, well, no, or she might have a birth certificate or something like that, but nothing substantial to support the allegations and the detail of the allegations. But the response of any of these victims and survivors has to be, you, the Garda Síochána, have got powers in law to go and get the documents for me. I have a right.
So say it's the Bon Secours. Yeah.
Say again?
It's the Bon Secours then. Say it's the.
It's the Bon Secours. Yeah, you have to satisfy my rights under the European Convention of Human Rights, whatever about all my rights under the Constitution, and you have powers, extensive powers under the 1997 Act, to get a warrant and to get in there and get those documents and assess my complaint against those documents, and then you can see clearly the extent of my complaints and the crimes that I'm alleging, and indeed the people who are involved. You will be able to help me as a victim identify from those records who the person or persons was that was responsible for those crimes. And then when you come to the issue of the suspicious death of the child, then you get into deeper into the records issue. So you may well say, for example, if we're talking about Tuam and the Bon Secours, you may be talking about the Galway County Council. You may be talking about Tusla records as well. There's a whole host of people.
And exhumation maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. Because then you see that's a really valid point. Because then you see a suspicious death has been reported to the Garda Síochána.
Yeah.
And the Garda Síochána are obligated, whatever about European Convention on Human Rights issues, Article 2, Article 6, etc., etc., they are obligated to investigate that death. That will require a pathologist examination of any remains that are found. But, you know, we all know that there are over 900 bodies within the cesspits of Chewham. And that's going to create an even bigger issue for the Garda Síochána. So just by this description, just by pointing out some of these issues, they may well think that they are creating a situation where they can overcome the difficulties, where they can present a tick box. But actually, it comes back to my opening point. They've opened up the gambit. They haven't maturely understood the implications of this. I don't believe actually that they can put this one to bed that easily, because even if they do, there are complaints that victims and survivors can make to the Garda Síochána Ombudsman Commission or service, I should say, and you know, that opens a whole raft of issues. So, you know, it is a watershed moment. It was an interesting announcement, but as Breeder is pointing out, there are some absolutely solid issues of concern about it being a tick box issue, about it being limited, about closing off stories and inquiries and getting documents. But I actually think it'll go the other way, and it may not happen with a raft of cases, but it will certainly happen with a handful of cases.
Absolutely, yeah. Even in Northern Ireland, I'm sure this Article 6 applies clearly in your case as well.
Of course, John, absolutely. You know, our thoughts on this would be, you know, us cynical and skeptical types, you know what I mean, that have all sorts of cited examples of how the police authorities and others, agents of state, would investigate themselves, which is effectively what the Garda in this case are being asked to do. What a lot of people have faith, trust and confidence in that is another issue. Obviously, a lot of the people that would be this outreach to, you know, thousands and thousands of victims and survivors and those affected by the mother and baby institutions, the laundries, etc. There could be an absolute tsunami and a deluge of people coming forward to the guards. A lot of this will depend on the will, the police will, the political will, the judicial will. Do a lot of people have faith in that? Absolutely not. So there needs to be a root branch reform of the criminal justice system. As I say, would the guards have the resources even put in place to deal with the whole deluge of complaints for a start? And of course, that overhanging state investigating itself, police investigating itself thing will be something that will need to be overcome very, very early in the whole process, for people to invest in the process. And of course, we would also be saying and advising, giving counsel to anybody that if you're even thinking about this here, that you need to have potential legal support on call. And should the burden of the cost of that fall on the victim survivor that's making the complaint? So legal aid might be coming into question there. Will that be provided? These victims and survivors also would need potential counselling support. Will that be provided when they're giving a testimony to the police? Would some of these people actually be coming to the police for the second, third or fourth time to make the same complaint? What has been done before? The police will obviously cite, in terms of their manpower, but also their financial costs and resources will be brought into this as well. Will that be all provided as necessary? And will they be able to engage enough staff if it becomes an ever-increasing incremental demand? Will they be able to cope with that? So there are a lot of things at play here at the end of the day, and given people also have to remember, and a lot of the audience might not even be aware of the extensive range of crimes and abuses that we're talking about here. I mean, they're just off the scale in terms of personal experiences where there might be a whole range of crimes involved in one person's experience for a start. People might even be aware of the false certification, for example. So you're potentially talking about forgery and handwriting experts being brought into. So this is absolutely monumental in terms of scale. But of course, like Breda and Frank have alluded to already, it's about, you know, there's so many aspects to this. It's really, really complex. Is it a tick box exercise? And are the guards trying to make it look as if they're doing what was insinuated in the commission's report? But they're now following on, as Frank says. They know damn well that there are a whole litany of crimes and abuses to be investigated here.
Yeah. I mean, it really was an unusual intervention. I know that Breda, I'm as cynical as you, Breda, about the kind of whole process, but there's certainly a change of tone. Drew Harris is obviously a former PSNI. What are your dealings with PSNI like, Keenan, over the mother and baby homes?
My personal update.
I mean, are they sympathetic? Is it a sympathetic ear you get from them?
No, John. You know, unfortunately, the police authorities in any jurisdiction in the UK or Ireland wouldn't have the best reputation. I mean, 2 or 3 broadsheet sessions wouldn't cover shall we say, the irreputable inquiries and investigations that have been carried out by the PSNI, the RUC, the guards, or you know what I mean, the English Met, or whoever you want to talk about.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? There's
change of tone recently, no?
Sorry?
Have you noticed a change of tone since Arlene and Michelle O'Neill came out with the statements? Have you noticed a kind of a softening up in that regard regarding the police?
Well, absolutely not, because obviously the police would be involved in the mother and baby institutions up here as well, because you know, a lot of people have to recognise that the judicial system was heavily involved. So the police would have escorted a lot of people under probation and remand to some of these mother and baby institutions. And you know, despite the fact that academics and others have said that a lot of the girls that went in these institutions went in of their own volition, in other words, voluntarily, under no duress or coercion. When a lot of these girls escaped, the first people that were called were the police authorities to go and find them and bring them back again. And there's questions around, you know what I mean, the walls and the fortifications of a lot of these institutions. If you look at them, there's a debate as to whether the walls were to keep people in or to keep people out. But no, the RUC PSNI would be gravely under scrutiny here as well. In terms of the Northern Ireland academic report that was released in January, a number of testimonies testified to the fact that some people suffered serious allegations. I questioned the chair of the interdepartmental working group on this, because obviously all of these crimes and allegations have to be reported to the police authorities, and I was told that those reports did not go to the PSNI, and that was apparently because the people that give testimony cited these allegations and crimes but didn't want the police involved. Plus, the serial priest who carried out all of these prolific crimes is deceased, and that means he's not to be chased for some reason or another. So how anybody makes that, I just quoted the Criminal Justice Act of 1967, which does not apply, because this guy has to be chased and hounded. His hierarchy and his superiors have to be asked what they knew about what was going on, the fact that he moved from institution to institution, and that the religious orders facilitated his movements. So again, the PSNI would need to be heavily involved in that at some point if we get our future state investigation.
Yeah, and a lot will depend on what happens in the south, really, won't it? I mean, you seem to be following us, or rather waiting to see what happens down
well,
here.
we have to, John, because you know, a lot of what's going on in the south of Ireland is very, very current and applicable to the north. A lot of people will try and extricate the issues and say that it's a different jurisdiction, etc., etc. But the crimes and abuses are exactly the same, just carried out on different people. And in terms of how the authorities, whether it's judicial, police, or whoever, deal with those crimes and abuses, is very, very, you know, we need to keep a close eye on it. And I'm sure the police authorities in both jurisdictions, because of course there might be a point where they might have to cooperate.
Yeah, I mean, didn't your mum spend time in Dublin as well, Ewan?
No, She was born in England and brought to Belfast, and after her time in the Good Nazareth House in Belfast, she was escorted across the road to the Good Shepherd Institution when she was 18 years of age, and I sent away to the PSNI and all of their relevant authorities to try and get a record on her being escorted across the road, but they have no details on it whatsoever. So again, this just shows that even though the police were involved, there doesn't seem to be any kind of a record on this here. But even conflict issues, you know what I mean? There have been widespread, numerous investigations and inquiries in the north and all of the conflict issues. And we've seen how the police have somehow conveniently destroyed or misled records. And that seems to be a widespread disease of some sort, you know what I mean, that has permeated the religious orders as well for some reason.
Yeah, because really the financial records are kind of key as well. They won't exist, but the crime you could say is that they were selling children, they were trafficking in children.
Absolutely. Teresa Sullivan, one of our members in the Alliance, spoke on Galway Bay FM last week. Her mother was 17 when she became pregnant in Ireland, and she went to the UK. And because somebody saw her, she was working, she was living with her family, her brothers and sisters who were going to take care of her. She was reported to the Catholic Rescue Society. So they took her back and she gave birth in the Tuam Mother and Baby Home. But on the way back, as she was being brought back, she was branded. The number 20 was written on her arm. And when Teresa was born, Teresa was the baby of mother number 20 in Tuam. And it's possibly that Teresa's mom was number 20 repatriated that week from the UK, I would think. I don't know what other reference there is, but you know, this dehumanizing and taking her back from where she was safe and taking her child away and keeping them apart for so many years. They did have approximately 15 years together when they were reunited, but she explained all of that. And Dr. Vicky Conway has very kindly done up, she's on the Policing Authority, and she's written on criminology, it's her area of interest. And she has written the many, many crimes that are applicable and allowed us to use them. I've been in touch with her, and she says that is why she did it, because she realizes, like everybody else, the many injustices. And as Ewan said, it's quite conceivable that victims would have, had many crimes against them, not just one or two. Could be falsified records, trafficking, all of that.
Yeah, I'm just going to call up the.
It's interesting. Sorry to just cut in there, but it's interesting to hear Teresa's story. I didn't realise that, and it's something that we all do because we use terminology that we kind of slipped into, and repatriation. And I've got a great quote which I'm going to send to you two guys from one of the rescue societies over in England. But, when we're talking about repatriation, we're talking about rendition.
Yeah.
That's effectively it. And, rendition has a history in recent times where people and governments have been prosecuted for the crime of rendition and the problems that have been associated with it. And I'm afraid to say, everything that has happened to the women who fled Ireland and came over to England to escape that and to be safe, as Breda has really pointed out, to be in a safe space and to be hopefully with their child, and then suddenly casted back, renditioned back into the Republic. That in itself is a crime. It's a crime of trafficking across borders, false imprisonments in another country. Goodness sake, the list goes on. And just to kind of support Ewan and Breda's very healthy skepticism about this announcement, and it'll be a skepticism that's shared by a number of people. My own skepticism has been tested. I like to think I'm a glass half full person, but when I went through some of this, looking at it from, the problems of survivors and victims and what they might be facing, I then came across an act, the Criminal Justice Victims of Crime Act 2017, and it's introduced by all the member states as a result of an EU directive to support the rights of victims and survivors of crime. So the rights of information, the review of decisions, and so on. But there's one thing that caught my eye, and that is Section 26 of the Irish Act introduces the concept of restorative justice. Now, I understand what that means in normal terms. Over here, if you've been a victim of a burglary or a kind of a minor assault or a car theft or something like that, they use restorative justice to try and bridge the gap between the offender and also the victim. And what is bugging me about this is, if this process has been started off with the intention to tick box, but to somehow guide the survivors into, and perhaps I'm being conspiratorial here, but I'm not conspiratorial by nature. But I think you have to kind of look beyond the words and wonder, what is playing at the back of this. And if there is an attempt, shall we say, to bring survivors into direct contact using the provisions of this act, and I don't think it's appropriate, but to use the provisions of this act by using restorative justice for survivors to individually meet the leaders of religious orders or indeed politicians, to try and find a restorative or mediative way to resolve the past, I would be very, very uncomfortable with that. And particularly on the basis of the way I think that the many survivors in this situation will be interviewed. And that is a big topic. It could be a topic of another program, but there has to be a root and branch reform consideration about how testimony is going to be gathered from the complainants of these crimes. And the testimony has to be done in the special interview suites. They have to be video recorded. They have to be completely qualified people dealing with victims of abuse or indeed vulnerable persons. And that system exists in the Republic for people under 17. I can't detect that it exists for people over 17, but my goodness me, it really should be deployed in this situation. And if the Garda Síochána are thinking that they can just sit somebody down and take comfortable statements in somebody's living room, they are mistaken, because that is how the depth of crimes, the depth of information escapes such serious issues, and there really needs to be a very, very, very clear path to deal with this.
I just wanted to share thank you, Frank. Just wanted to share can you see that? The criminal offences?
Yeah.
Maybe if you just want to talk us through some of that, Breda or Ian. The offences which may have occurred in institutions, they go for anything: assault, removing child from the state, child stealing, so false imprisonment. Can you see that okay?
Yep, I can see.
John, if I could just bring in an important point here, because obviously that statement included the so-called passage of time, which brings in the statute of limitations as well. And people obviously have been calling for a reform of statute of limitations on its removal from certain crimes. We obviously have a process ongoing at the minute. There's been some highlighted news here in the north in terms of the victims' conflict issues and the Stormont House Agreement and the protection of soldiers that have been
Yeah.
that have been made allegations about their involvement in some of the killings in the north here. This is very, very important, because even if you talk about the enforced disappearances within the mother and baby institutional issues, Magdalene issues, obviously they apply not just to the conflict, but the issues that we're talking about here as well. And notably, they are actually classed as crimes against humanity, so wouldn't come under the statute of limitations. And it would be interesting to see how these all pan out in terms of the interpretation, even of some of these crimes.
Yeah. Any stand out for you there, Ewan?
Well, crimes against humanity, we could probably argue that a lot of these, the crimes that have been committed within and without these institutions, would fall within that category. I mean, when you go into burials and deaths and mass graves, multiple burials, etc., they obviously, we would contend that they fall within crimes against humanity. And child stealing, child laundering, child trafficking, international trafficking,
the false registration, they're crimes that can be easily proved, actually, can't they? I mean, in your case, Ewan, and
well, sometimes that's going to depend on what documentation you have access to and what you actually retain, and what you hold in some cases, because obviously,
would the guards be obliged then to go to the religious order then, if you were accusing them of that crime, for instance, false registration or false birth? Are the guards not obligated then to go to approach the Mother Superior or whatever? And
well, Frank was touching on this earlier. You know what I mean? Yeah. It seems to be that under the current law, they would have methods at their disposal to actually go and seize and search for these records. And it'd be interesting to see where so many people have been denied access to information on their personal records. Would the channel of the police then be a viable option then in getting access to these records and information, through a criminal complaint process then? And again, obviously, if that's going to be a viable option, a lot of people are going to take that, not just because it's convenient in terms of the crime that they're complaining about, but obviously that's going to open up a whole wider, bigger debate then around access to information, and how the police can potentially get access to this information that people can't otherwise get access to through GDPR and subject access requests, etc.
And the offences Gardaí may have committed false imprisonment or abduction if they brought or returned somebody to an institution, and misconduct in public office if they fail to act on a report of any of the crimes mentioned above. Then they have to investigate themselves.
No, not at all. No. It's interesting the way the statement has been fashioned, because it gives the impression that all crimes have to be reported to the Garda Síochána, right? But where you have complaints against, I was thinking as Ewan was talking, I've met women who have been able to name their tormentors within the religious orders. I've met women who've actually been able to name individual Gardaí. And, in those situations, if, say, one of those women decided they wanted to make a complaint about the way they were treated by that individual Gardaí member, they must not go through this process. They have to make the complaint through the Garda Síochána Ombudsman Commission. That is the correct way to do it, because they are the ones who are tasked by an act of the Oireachtas to investigate complaints against either the Garda as a whole or Gardaí. It doesn't matter. So it's interesting how the statement kind of gave a bit of a steer, if you like, away from that. And most people, because Breda said this at the beginning, because there is a difficulty for many people to understand the subtleties, if you like, the intricacies of some of these issues. And, Union, really touched well on some of these issues like crimes against humanity. Again, there's a bit of a steer going on here that all crimes have to be reported to the Gardaí. But there is an argument that, if you have such a depth of crime and criminality going on here, which amount to crimes against humanity, as defined by the International Criminal Court, then it is they who should be tasked with dealing with it, not the Irish authorities, although there are examples of countries taking a hold of such inquiries, say after there's been a change of regime or something like that. But on the question of limitation, again, Union makes very valid points on this. But from what I can detect, and remember, guys, I'm not an expert in Irish law, but indictable offences, and that is what all of these offences will be, indictable offences. So they will go before, the higher courts, the Central Criminal Court, the Circuit Court. They appear to have no limitation period. There may be qualifying limitation periods in individual acts, which I certainly haven't detected. But if a Gardaí says to any survivor, well, I'm afraid you're out of time, then I'm afraid that has to be instantly challenged. And if the Gardaí won't accept it, then, I'm sorry, this is a bit rigmarole-ish in many respects, but that individual has to make a formal complaint to the Ombudsman. And hereby, it comes into my earlier comments that they think it's a tick box exercise. They think it's all over, I think is the saying, as the saying goes. But actually, no, it isn't, because it will deliver legal challenges. It will open up a dialogue, and it will, in my view, if they do decide to go down the tick box route, whereby you will see in perhaps not the too distant future, where the Garda Commissioner has to come out in public again and says, actually, we've decided to extend the period, for people to make their complaints.
Yeah.
Blah, blah, blah. Yeah.
And maybe you want to go to GSOC as well if you want to.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Rita, your survivors, the survivors that are you work with, have they ever gone to the police? Have they ever gone to the guards about their cases? Yeah, and
you're on mute.
Sorry, guys. Yeah, missing persons cases, John, have been filed with the Gardaí, but of course there's and to be fair to the Gardaí, that has to be reported in the first instance where the person goes missing, so it's Tuam initially, and then they send out a team to interview the family, and they do a fairly comprehensive report, but of course nothing is progressed because the exhumation, nothing has happened there. But the likelihood being always, and many people have this fear who are families of the disappeared or lost children, is that they are alive, and that it's not a fear, it's a hope actually, that they are alive, that they're living a good life in the United States or Canada. And the way of maybe trying to find them is through DNA and doing my ancestry or doing the heritage. But failing that, if they do not come forward, then, and the passage of time, and you thinking, they would be now 70, 80 years old. And there doesn't appear to be any connection to family members or whatever of their family, then you begin to think that maybe they're in the ground in Tuam. So families are waiting, and like as Frank says, I would still encourage people to absolutely make a complaint, go to the Gardaí, but there needs to be enough resources in place, and people of that age category, and even myself, going along to a Garda station to make a complaint, it's daunting. And there needs to be all of the necessary supports that Frank and Union have talked about. And I don't think those are there. for interview, to get the information, and maybe going back 2 or 3 times. We have to be serious about this. There should be criminal investigations. And I was really glad to see that one of the councillors in February, speaking in Carlow County Council, had said, Adrian Wallace, I think is her name. I wrote to all the councillors in Carlow today, because when I found that 3 of the councillors had initially asked the council to open all of their files and to give their records to those who were coming looking for them. And there were 600 mothers who'd left Carlow for various institutions, including in Galway. So of course you're talking about maybe 600 babies that survived, or 500 or whatever. So again, you're talking about a lot of people. But what Councillor Wallace had said was that this is a crime scene. These areas, these sites are literally crime scenes. And I thought, for somebody to say that, who's actually a councillor, when many times we're trying to impact on councils to say that all of the sites need to be protected and preserved until such time as we are satisfied that there are no mass burials or inappropriate burials on the site, and no development can take place, that we need to be assured of that. And we're working on a document, all 3, Frank and Ewan and myself, on that at the moment.
And could you go to Drew Harris and say, Drew, Mr. Commissioner, I believe there's 900 bodies buried in the vicinity of Besborough House, and I'd like the guards to do something about that. I mean, is that too simplistic a notion?
I don't think it's simplistic, but listening to Breeder and Ewan, Breeder has expressed, I think, the very serious and deep concerns about this announcement. And I would say, if Commissioner Drew Commissioner Drew is watching this, or one of his assistants, he's made the statements, and now what he should be doing before anybody starts to do anything, he should be meeting with Breeder Murphy and Ewan there, and understanding the nature of what exactly is required before they even begin to interview the victims and survivors, and the requirements particularly on that interview, but also the general concern about documentation. Perhaps they do understand that, but I think what would be wise, instead of having a conversation between themselves down in Dublin, is to actually start to open up and have a proper consultation with, for example, like the Chum Mother and Baby Home Alliance, and people like Ewan, because there are definitely cross-border issues on this. Because if the Garda Síochána are truly serious about investigating these crimes, they really need to understand the underlying fears and concerns, and indeed the methodology. And I think this is the key point here. A methodology needs to be considered and properly defined, and it should be a survivor-led methodology that is presented by the Garda Síochána in tandem with survivor groups, and that would build confidence into this process. It may not be politically popular, but by goodness me, it would change the dialogue, and it would build a greater confidence than what we're currently seeing.
Couldn't they use Tuam as the starting point? You've got an unauthorized burial ground, more bodies than there are death certs. Is that not enough to raid the Bon Secours, get the documentation? Was that not enough to prompt some Gardaí action?
Well, yeah, it should be. I mean, just by international policing standards, we shouldn't be too parochial about this. This is, as Ewan says, collectively crimes against humanity. And if you're uncomfortable with that, the viewers of this broadcast, if you're uncomfortable with that, let's break the crimes down. And then let's just look at what international policing practice is.
Yeah.
And if you need to do all of the above in order to, deliver justice to those victims, never mind your restorative justice.
Yeah.
It has to be transitional justice. You have to create justice result that changes the republic forever.
Yeah.
It's not about, you can't put people back into a situation that they were never in the first place. You have to transit that individual and the justice system and the crimes from the past into the present and change society as a whole. That is the only just way to do it.
Really, I don't want to go on about too much, but we know that the bonds there. I mean, have you spoken with local Gardaí even in relation to that, to the burial ground, or is there regular contact with guards in Tuam?
For us, we've contacted the Gardaí in Tuam a couple of years ago, but not in recent times. We haven't. But there are some members who will certainly, I think, contact them now. But again, it's about what resources. And as Frank says, one would be reluctant to, have this conversation on a telephone call. It has to be empathic. It has to gain the trust of the people who, for decades, have been wronged by state, by the Gardaí before. So, and there's not a lot of trust in the system anyway. Everything has broken down, and I think more recently it's just added to the pain that people feel because we're not getting anywhere. The acceptance of the Commission's report by the government, and particularly the executive summary that makes certain comments and statements, and we don't know who made those. I think that's a big problem as well. You don't have the authors of the report. We can say that it came from the 3 commissioners, but how did it ever get past the commissioners, all of the various government departments, come through the minister? I mean, I can't believe that there wasn't somebody in Leinster House that said, we cannot let survivors see this document because we can anticipate how they would feel. It's blaming everybody except state and religious who really caused the problems in the first place.
Yeah.
Key to all this is, I come back to it probably several times now, perhaps too much in this broadcast, but it's about evidence. And Ewan has shared with me today a questionnaire which is designed to extract opinion, and I've seen other questionnaires elsewhere which is designed to attract evidence. And excuse me, but with the best will in the world, it's all very artificial. It's all very distant. It doesn't get to the core of experience. And I'll give you a very good example. I had the privilege, I think it must be nearly 2 weeks ago, to attend Tuam Mother and Baby Home Alliance meeting. And I can tell you, John, that was probably one of the most harrowing meetings that I have ever attended. I heard things that I thought I'd heard everything, but I heard things in that meeting that I could never even begin to imagine. Never begin to imagine. How can you possibly, after hearing something like that, expect a witness or a potential complainant to sit with a pro forma or sit with an officer in their living room and set out those things? What they gave in that alliance meeting was true, living, hard fact testimony. And that testimony revealed crimes. And that's the difference. That's the point I'm making about the way, my concern about survivors and the way they're going to be interviewed. And I absolutely reject pro forma interviewing. You see it in group actions, or as you say in the Republic, representative actions, but you see it in group actions that pro formas are used to extract information. They are not applicable in this case. And if you take my example of the Alliance meeting a couple of weeks back, that was that's true testimony. That is exactly what the Garda Síochána should be aiming for.
And how would they go about that? To create a kind of a department almost to deal with it?
Well, no. I mean, in fairness, I've been a bit critical about the Garda Síochána, and as an retired police officer, I can be critical because I've got a different window into it than most people.
Okay.
But I have looked over the last couple of weeks at reports about how to deal with interviewing victims of abuse and vulnerable persons. And it is in fact, it's a system that is deployed all the way across Europe. We have a very detailed system here in the UK about how people of such crimes are handled. And I've read some of the reports, some of the reviews, literally within the last 12 months, and you can see within the reports testimony from individual Gardaí who have said, our system isn't up to the task. We would love to do this. We would love to be able to have these qualifications. But what is interesting about the Irish situation is where they're dealing with children, or should I say minors under 17, they are video interviews. They are interviewed by people with specific qualifications to deal with victims of abuse or vulnerable persons. They are interviewed in effectively secret locations with specially constructed interview suites. This is exactly where these interviews should be conducted. The Garda Commissioner should be saying, right, we must deploy what we do for the under-17s for this category of victim. We must do it. And that is the only way to do it. That is the only way to get to the evidence, the kind of stuff I heard in the Alliance meeting a couple of weeks ago, because that reveals the crime, that reveals the individuals, that reveals the crimes against humanity. And, you cannot have, you can see why now, when I'm talking, why Breeder, particularly at the beginning, expressed concern about a tick box process. And that is why I would encourage, if the Commissioner is listening or anybody else is listening, that he picks up the phone to Breeder tomorrow morning and he speaks directly with her and he meets with her and UNAN, because I say there are cross-border issues, and to define and create a methodology before this thing really kicks off.
Brilliant. I have the questionnaire up here. UNAN, did you want to mention anything about it?
Well, if I could first of all just say that I think this throws open another debate and highlights the different routes and the obstructions to justice, to be honest with you, because if you look at the Commission to Inquire into Child Abuse in the South of Ireland, and Judge Mary Lafoy left the stage when she couldn't get access to all the relevant documentation, especially from the Educational Authority as well. And there was an indemnity deal done between sitting parliaments before Judge Sean Ryan took over, and he insisted basically, and this is about justice at the end of the day, and criminal justice, which effectively closed down any criminal prosecutions of perpetrators.
Yeah.
And it brings into question gagging orders and the waivers that are imposed within these state investigations and inquiries. So the Garda have now taken what seems to be a proactive approach. Where does that leave people that went through these state inquiries and investigations and are now bound by the indemnity deals and by their own civil cases as well, that were gagging orders were implemented to shut them off from criminal justice? Are the Garda now taking a different approach? And for the other cohort of people that haven't been through that type of justice and obstructed, because there's a massive debate and a quandary and a dilemma here for the people that are effectively and in reality given a choice that you can't have truth disclosure in any form of justice, that it's an either or. So are the guards going to pursue criminal justice and still leave open the doors to all of the other injustices and justice addressed on the back of those?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I think there's a debate to be had about it, because, you know, obviously too many people have suffered, as I say, through the state investigations, where there's indemnities, there's this impunity, and the perpetrators can't be touched under any circumstances. And yet the guards are now going to pursue some kind of form of criminal justice for the people outside of it.
I mean, maybe they have done this, but I would say to my Irish legal colleagues out there, an indemnity deal versed against the Human Rights Convention.
Yeah, yeah.
How does that work?
Is that challengeable?
Yeah. I mean, come on, guys. Come on, lads.
How strong is a gagging order when it's criminal offence? I mean, gagging orders don't apply. NDAs or whatever don't apply when it's a crime. You can't cover up. You can't be gagged about sharing the details of a crime.
That's an interesting scenario there. Then how we deal with that?
Maybe we'll get onto that maybe next week. We've run out of time. Incredibly absorbing show tonight. Thank you very much, Breda Murphy, Union Duffy, and Frank Breheny. And hopefully we'll see you all next